Is it important for your and Penrose's view that there be entanglement between neurons or any other quantum effect that's collective across multiple neurons? And if so, are you claiming that there is any experimental evidence at all that that exists?
Yes and yes. As I said, if you have all this going on one neuron, it's going to make that neuron really smart, but it's not going to help with consciousness in the brain. The brain needs entanglement just to explain things like zero phase lag gamma synchrony. You can't explain how you can have perfectly timed gamma all over the brain by membrane propagation. If you say, well, it's ephaptic, but that doesn't, that kind of peters out. So I think you need that anyway. You need it for that. You need it for spatial temporal binding, and you need it for consciousness. Is there evidence? Anirban just published a paper that where he showed entanglement between two microtubules. He had a group of microtubules. He entangled them with a laser, separated them, one in one cuvette, one in the other, and showed like an EPR experiment between the two. That needs to be fleshed out, but there is preliminary evidence. Yes.
The question I had is, if you're studying anything that is supposed to be, fundamental or universal, even if we take consciousness as something that's fundamental, right? If it's fundamental and it permeates everywhere, how do you actually differentiate that? If it is everywhere in everything that you're studying or you're doing because it's ubiquitous, how do you actually quantify or formalize something like that?
Well, it's everywhere in the microenvironment, which is everything, but those are not orchestrated. They're proto-conscious. We would call them random. So they're happening everywhere, and in the table, in the air, and so forth. Now, that seems kind of weird, but if you believe in panpsychism, which many neuroscientists resort to because they can't explain consciousness through emergence, you'd have to accept that everything has a little bit of consciousness. But the problem with panpsychism is, how do you combine it? If it's a quantum effect, they combine by entanglement, and you get larger and larger, and you get orchestration. So that's the difference.
Right, but if it is, everywhere, if it's panpsychism and we say everything has some level of being conscious, if it's everywhere, how do you actually differentiate it? Do you know what I mean? Like if something is everywhere in anything that the way that you're measuring, whatever you're using to measure, whatever, how do you actually?
Well, we can't really measure consciousness. That's the problem. However, I would answer your question this way. If you go to the symphony and the musicians are tuning their instruments beforehand, you hear everybody, they're making these noises. It's noise. It's not really music. That's like proto-consciousness everywhere. Then they start playing Beethoven or Brahms or the Beatles or whatever. That's music, and that's the difference. It's orchestrated.
So do you have any developmental story of when the orchestration emerges in development? Because I forgive my ignorance in biology, but I think that maybe the microtubes are since the beginning.
No,
okay.
No, the beginning are just these aromatic rings, but they're going to self-organize. They can still self-organize to optimize pleasure. When the microtubules came in, the party line is that it was a symbiotic event, according to Lynn Margulis Sagan, when you had these prokaryotes and mitochondria came and gave energy, and then spirochetes came and gave the cytoskeleton, which stayed inside for internal compartmentalization and motility to move it around. So the microtubule story wouldn't come till fairly later, whenever that symbiotic event was, unless they happened earlier. Maybe as some kind of analog of fullerenes, which were there anyway, which have the same structure. So I think we have to go a long way from in the micelle stage before we get to microtubules. But until you get real big, I don't think that's a problem, because who's gonna, these micelles they're probably everywhere anyway. So,
orchestration. When the orchestration emerges.
I think you can get some form of orchestration, even just with aromatic rings. But it's not in the same category as when you get the microtubules and you get all these vibrational resonances and different frequencies involved.
I like the idea of how, sort of at the lower than the synaptic level, you get this sort of more effective information processing due to these resonance structures that kind of emerge. But I guess I'm not quite tracking exactly how you would get phenomenal experience from these Bing moments. Like, how does that sort of turn into this like cohesive consciousness?
Orchestration. So the Bing moment is is at least proto-conscious. It has some element of qualia in it, whatever that may be, and you take and those are like the tones of the musicians tuning their instruments, and then you put it all together into a symphony. And that's what the microtubules do. And before the microtubules, maybe they do it to a more limited extent with the aromatic rings self-organizing.
It sounds like with all the microtubules inside neurons, that a single neuron effectively acts as like a quantum reservoir computer, and the similarity on different time scales says there's like some time fractal like computational nature to it.
Yes. Yeah, Anirban calls microtubules time crystals, and he's got all these models about time crystals. So, you have these clock. It's like a clock within a clock within a clock within a clock. Yes, that's what he says. I think that's what you said.
When you showed the picture of the two benzene rings next to each other and said there could be conscious experience just between those two because
it would be pleasure. It would take a long time. By E equals H over T, the E sub G there is so small, the T would be like a decade, 10 years, if from just two little things. You need a lot of them for it to happen in a reasonably short time.
I guess what I'm wondering is, what's the difference between stability of some conformation of electromagnetic state versus pleasure? Like who's perceiving pleasure when you're talking about two benzene rings?
The event itself is pleasure. You don't necessarily need a self. I mean, people meditate to lose their self. They just want the pure experience. And I don't think you need a self. I've argued, other people have different opinions. But if you have the experience and you have it over and over again, or similar experiences with memory and so forth, that's how the self forms. I don't think you need a self to have an experience. But a lot of people would agree with you. I don't think so. Then you have to explain what that is. And it's just kind of coherent and entangled information. So you still need quantum. In other words, you have experience over time, and you're you because you remember those, and anything that triggers your memory, that's part of you.